Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Grindhead podcast. I've been struggling with podcast formats for years. I have done at least a dozen different formats over the last 5 years. I'm not kidding. Almost 6 years. Actually, 6 years, yeah. And I've done all different kinds of podcasts, different kinds of AMAs, different kinds of like vlogs, and I've been trying to figure out what it is that I should be emulating where a podcast format is concerned for me. And what I struggle with is like, do you do one podcast about music? Do you do one about games? Do you do one about... Because a lot of podcasts, they are very laser focused on one thing or another. And that's great. I'm not that guy. I mean, am I like a Destiny player? I'm a Destiny streamer most of the time? Sure. But I love, during those streams, I love talking about a wide array of topics. And I really enjoy just a ton of different things all within that, those confines. So I felt like if I'm going to do a podcast, then it needs to be reflective of that. By the way, song requests are active. They just won't show as playing up there. You'll be able to hear them, and I'm recording this separately. So you won't be able to hear that on the final podcast product. So for you live folks, that's going to be something for you. So you're not going to disrupt the podcast. You're not going to fuck me up. Don't worry about it. Just let that happen. Let it happen. All right? So I kind of decided that I needed a podcast that was just me, and not necessarily just me in it, because I'm going to have people on here, but whatever I wanted it to reflect, basically, whether that be politics, whether that be music, whether that be gaming, technology, whatever the fuck is on my mind. So today, like in light of like the Destiny servers being down for a couple hours, I knew I was going to be playing that. So I said, all right, I'm going to take the downtime, and I'm going to take a little bit out of what would normally be the morning show, and I'm going to look into, okay, do I finally want to make this a real thing? And one of the things that had been holding me back from doing a real podcast is that I don't like Podbean. I do not like most of the major podcast services out there, iTunes included, though I will probably be submitting this to iTunes. But I wanted something that I could put it on, make it easy to access no matter who you were. And then I realized that my favorite podcasts, most of them are on SoundCloud. So I was like, and I don't need to monetize with SoundCloud or with the podcast at this point. Most of your monetization for the podcast, if you have one, is going to be through a subscription model of some kind or sponsorships and stuff like that. Now, let's face it, I'm probably not going to get a sponsorship. And I'll be doing this on Twitch. I'll be uploading these to YouTube as well without the music, because I figured out a way to do that. But my primary outlet's going to be SoundCloud for audio. So those of you that are here will get to just watch and listen and participate, and I'll answer questions when I have time and stuff like that. And there'll usually be Q&As at the end for sure. But ultimately, I wanted something that, how can I cater to me as a personality on Twitch? How can I cater to the needs of a podcast listener? How can I reinvigorate my YouTube channel with minimal effort, frankly, and hopefully guarantee success? So here we are. So welcome to the first episode of Grindhead Podcast. My name is Grindhead Jim. I'm your host, and we're talking about whatever the fuck's on my mind. Today, we're talking about the music industry, how it used to be, how it used to operate, and what differences, what influenced those things into what we have today, why today's model is better for the average musician, and how, as a musician or as a listener of music, you can benefit from it. So it kind of starts with my background. As a musician, I've been a professional musician at least a third of my life at this point. I started playing drums as early as 5, according to my mother, because they gave me a drum and I would beat the shit out of it. I didn't get really serious about it. Like, I really wanted to learn about drums until I was about 12 or 13. In between there, I did play some alto sax and learn some basic music stuff, things like that. But my real passion for music came around the age of 10. When I started listening to bands like Tears for Fears, Queen, and almost immediately Metallica and Napalm Death, like all like swirled around. You know, that's why you'll hear, you know, switches like that, you know, from a synth pop band like Gunship to an extreme over-the-top tech death band or slamcore, whatever the fuck name they're called now, Infinite Annihilator. And I like it all. I like it all. But I always let that kind of be my influence personally as a musician. So I always had this stars in the eyes. If you had a record album or a CD or a tape or, you know, something I could buy in the store, you know, that was going to be something that was to be aspired to, right? Like it was like this unattainable thing. And for me, it kind of, it was something that I wanted to be. I had no idea how to do it, but I decided I wanted to be there. And so, and this is from a very early age, I was like, I want to do that. I want to entertain people. I simultaneously had a very strong interest in stand-up comedy, which incidentally also had your record albums and your tapes and your CDs and stuff. So all this stuff, I was kind of like, this is where I want to be. So right around the time I'm getting really interested in music, I started interested in getting, you know, playing music. So I'd say that continued through high school. Graduated high school, and I had the opportunity to go to Indiana State University of Pennsylvania, which is Indiana city and a county in Pennsylvania. It's not, you know, state of Indiana. But I ended up, it was going to be going for art teaching of all things, believe it or not. And I know, right? I never draw anything for you guys, and I probably should at some point on creative. But I ended up at the last second, I'm talking like weeks from graduation, going, no, I'm not into it. Like, I'm not doing it. And it was a sweet gig. That's a nice college. The cafeteria was tight. I was going to be able to live there. You know, it would have been like the excellent college experience, right? And I just said, fuck, I don't want to do that. And they're like, what? Why? Like, I really want to pursue music, like really hardcore. And they supported me, and they said, well, there are some sacrifices you're going to have to make. You won't be able to stay at the college because it's too expensive. You'll have to commute, you know, and all this other stuff. So I ended up going to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh for music production, and that lasted a semester. Not kidding. I ended up quitting because I didn't feel like it was teaching me anything. It definitely was, but I learned from those classes I was taking that I was learning more by doing than I was in the classroom. And I was like, why am I paying these motherfuckers? I should just go do it. And so I did. And much to my parents' chagrin, when they finally found out that I wasn't going to class anymore, and there was other stuff I was doing with my time I shouldn't have been doing. But so I ended up getting really serious around that time, playing shows all the time, doing whatever jobs I could that would work around me being a musician, basically. And ultimately getting experience with everybody I could and latching on, just, you know, really digging in. So by now it's 1996, almost a decade later from when I really started listening to music. At that point, music was still very much not an old boys network, but at the same time was really hard to get in. But the structure at the time was you recorded a demo and you sold it, not necessarily for money, but you'd give it away. You want to get as many people's hands as possible. There's a heavy tape trading phenomenon going on at that time, where, and this would, anyone who'd ever listened to anything Metallica's ever put out in terms of a documentary or history, they'll tell you all about fucking tape trading and how it made their fucking career. So you'd make a tape and you trade it with guys at shows and everything else. And so at the end of the day, you wanted to get it in as many people's hands as possible, as quickly as you could. But it was dependent upon your ability to get yourself in front of people. You would also send to distribution centers, you would send to record labels, and hope that someone would offer to finance and distribute a full length or an EP or something. And that was such a far-fetched thing back then, because that was the only avenue. That was it. You know, otherwise you might be writing to like magazines or something like that, trying to get people to write to you, and all be done through the mail. There was no internet. There was no access. You know, so like CD collection over here, so many of those CDs were things that have never been on the internet and probably never will. It's weird to think about. So I'm toiling away, and we record our first demo, and the demo ended up costing us something like $587. I know it seems like a really exact number, but that's what I remember in my head. Because we had 500 and we were like, might have been 687, because we had 500 and we were like 187 short, and my parents were able to pay the extra way to get in there. And so we finished the demo, which sounded great, but it didn't sound like us. And so, like, we peddled that around, and we thought, like all artists do, that was the best thing in the world, which invariably, folks, spoilers, it isn't the best. So, you know, the band eventually broke up, and I went from band to band to band to band, soaking up, you know, experience, not just in live music, but writing music, recording techniques, because all these guys were trying to record at home because they knew they couldn't afford the studios. So the demo stuff, they had their like 8 tracks and stuff. And that was like, if you knew someone had an 8-track recorder, like that was the guy you wanted to really, really stick with. You know what I mean? So you would end up hanging out with those guys and learning what they did. You pick up a little bit here, you pick up a little there, and you know, but unless you actually had the equipment, and it was always hardware based, you weren't going to do nothing with it. So, you know, by 1999, I'd done various demo recordings of varying degrees of success. One of my high points, in my opinion, was recording a completely live demo with no rehearsal of me and a cello player. And the cello player had an electric pickup embedded in the cello, and he had an effects pedal layout on the floor, and he would sit there and make crazy noises and stuff because he couldn't play cello traditionally because he had nerve damage in his wrists from an accident. But he was like a classically trained professional cellist, so like he knew that instrument inside and out. And then when you add like these sounds to it, plus me just jamming, you know, on this 5-piece jazz drum kit doing blast beats and shit, it was really cool. And he had 2 mics, and he did like a quick mix setup, and that was it. I still have the tape. I actually been in the market. I've been shopping for a decent tape deck so I can digitize most of this stuff and have it somewhere, right? But I digress. So I recorded a bunch of demos. I had a really good idea of like all these varied things that I wanted to do, but no way of breaking into the industry. Like no one had like it was all blind luck. It was, were you in the right place at the right time, talking to the right people, were the right people hearing your shit? And I was fed up with it. And it was no coincidence that I was also broke. And so I sidetracked everything. And I ended up homeless for quite a while. And a lot of you know the story that I ended up going into the Marine Corps. That's going to be a whole other podcast series, to be honest with you. And when I come out of the Marines, even in the Marines, I'd done a couple of recordings, believe it or not, which were, again, varying degrees of success and so forth. But I moved to Chicago specifically to pursue, like, if I'm going to do music, I got to do it now. Because I was in, at that point, I would have been in my late 20s. And to me, it was like, well, it's got to go now. And I was right. So I went to Chicago under the auspices of this one band I was going to join. And I was in that band for like 3 weeks. That band never, ever rematerialized. They Did get back together with a different guy. Played maybe 3 shows, maybe, and that was that. And it was just a matter of like the guy who was in charge of that band just really wasn't really interested in doing it, which was fine. But through him, I met the guys I would later get into a band with called Cardiac Arrest. And although I'd started a project that didn't quite gel, I was well into my Cardiac Arrestum, right? So by now, we're talking about it's 2004. The internet has been a thing. And for a long time, the tradition was you record your album if you're an established band, or you record your demos, and you put the MP3s up on your website for people to download. And I will never forget the first MP3 that I ever downloaded. And it was Origin. It was a song called Portal on the III album. And I had 24K dial-up. Or, wait, let me think. 28K. But it took like 25 minutes to download one song. And it was glorious. And I never, ever thought it would get to where it is now. I ended up getting to a point where I had digitized my entire CD collection, which literally took months because I have so many. And the CD burners were slower at the time, right? And then, because I couldn't find them anywhere else. Little did I know that in a few years, every album I own, with very few exceptions, would be on the internet to download. It would have saved me a lot of effort. When I got broadband and so forth, I started really looking around at how things were working. And this is when MySpace first became a thing. And MySpace was the first place that music was being shared freely. In terms of streaming music and saying, this is me, we're pushing this forward. There were some artists that would take advantage of Napster or LimeWire, and they would put out their albums, and it would put it in a zip file with another song you wanted. Like if you wanted a Metallica song, you'd get that, but you'd also get their album and shit. Very guerrilla stuff, but I never listened to that shit, and neither did anyone I knew. It didn't really work. So we used MySpace. We would record a demo, again at our expense, take the CDs, print them, give them out at shows, but also we'd put things on the internet and give it to them for free and let them hear it. And it was because of this instant gratification, this instant way of talking to virtually anyone over the internet, that we finally did get signed to a very small label. And things just kind of blew up from there. And it was one of these things where I was in close to a dozen bands by that point, if not more, really, if I think about it, that had played shows of similar size, had rubbed elbows with just as powerful people. But for whatever reason, this particular band at that particular time, because we were able to reach out to more people and show that we had a following worldwide, were able to prove that we were going to make it. And so you go from being out in the middle of nowhere in terms of the music industry, anyway, not having a fan base outside of your local area, not a big one anyway, and having to rely on mail and blind luck. And then, 10 years later, to being able to reach out to virtually anyone at any time and get your music in front of them. And then it just being a matter of a little less blind luck. And it's interesting because now you don't even have to rely, and that was fucking 13 years ago. And then, because we were like, oh wow, we were signed, we got a label and shit. That was the worst thing I ever did in terms of my music career. Because we signed away rights to the record for, I think it was, I want to say 10 years. And the reason I say that is because it came out in 2007, and this year it's being released on vinyl. Of which I'm seeing no money from, by the way. Which is fine. I didn't ask for it. and I'm not going to. However, I have a, get merch free card forever, which is also awesome. But we didn't understand the market we were in at the time. The people that were distributing our records, they knew that the future was digital. So the distribution deal that our labels had were through like CD Baby and a couple other places where they reserved rights for like iTunes and shit. And you were basically signing away your rights to the digital stuff. The label and the band. So as far as I know, the label's not even making money off of that at this point. Which is weird if you think about it. But, like, you can find my old band on YouTube, like YouTube Music, like the re-uploaded, like the nice tracks and shit. Now, for that, I know the label's getting money. I'm not getting any. I don't necessarily want the money. All I ever wanted from music was to be appreciated as an artist. And I got that out of music when I left it. But for a lot of people, this is their livelihood, right? I tried to make a living at it. I know that I couldn't. Maybe if I had it to do over again, or it was just a few years later, I'd be saying a different thing. But here's what's different. Today, what you can do is really compelling in as much as you can create your own music. You can put it wherever you want. You can monetize it yourself. You can advertise it yourself, all at minimal cost, without ever involving anybody else. So, even back in the early 2000s, the mid, 2000s, the aughts, if you will, we were reliant on recording studios, and they're recording a new album right now, and they're still going to a recording studio of, someone else's. But many people that we were recording with were musicians in their own right that just happened to take the time to buy the tech, to learn the software, and get it done. And depending upon what kind of music you compose, and I think this is a reason that dubstep, for example, is so huge. I could make a dubstep album right here, very easily, if I wanted to. I don't want to, but because it's all electronic, it's all on the computer, and it's free or low cost to make it. And then you upload it to YouTube, and you upload it to SoundCloud or whatever, and suddenly your shit's out there. And it's just a matter of people finding it. And it's not that hard. There are people that will just go nuts trying to find shit. And it's all about, your SEO, your search engine optimization skills and tagging stuff and, pasting it every fucking where. And it is infinitely easier to get started, but if you have a little more drive, a little more passion, and you're willing to do the work, which I would argue is actually harder work than loading in and playing a show, you can get somewhere. There are people that made their entire, career online. You take a person like Rebecca Black, who didn't, yeah, that was recorded in the studio, but it was YouTube that made her what she is. Both a laughing stock and a viable income. Like, she's making money off that shit to this day. You're like, you got to hear this fucking shitty ass song. Chocolate Rain, Gangnam Style. The list goes on. People that are making, like, they at least were making money hand over fist because of a fluke. But they would never have had that opportunity in the climate 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Would never have happened, right? So, but the thing is, what's funny to me about the industry now is that people are still, for some reason, really after that record deal still. The problem is that record companies are even less likely to sign you now because there's more risk involved because they sell less. Unless they're smart and they, go digital and stuff. Labels that I was really into, they have persevered because they've embraced digital. So you'll see like lyric videos, and even Metallica put out every single song from their record in one form or another online for free. hoping people would still buy the record. You know what? They fucking did. So when Metallica, the guys who were against Napster from the onset and were so anti-internet, you know, now they're on Spotify. Now they have, like, they're in full control of their catalog, and they're monetizing it their way. Because they finally figured it out. Like, it's going to get out there whether we want it to or not, but if we're in control of it, we might make a little bit of money back that we were otherwise losing. So I think that today's artist has a lot more to gain from just embracing technology, staying independent, and putting things out there, which is way better than sitting at home thinking you're the best fucking thing in the world and then waiting for someone to discover you rather than discovering ways to make yourself relevant. Like that's the way that I look at it. You know, as I sit here, like, I'm looking at implements in front of me that I keep meaning to write a new record on, and I know that I could easily do it. My goal is to make the song, or rather make the album, put it out on either Bandcamp or SoundCloud or both for little to no cost, and make it free and never perform live. That's the goal. Napster is a free ripping site. So, like, what Napster used to be, okay, let me take you back. Let me take you back to, like, 99. What Napster was, if you ripped a CD, you could upload it. It was like torrenting before there was torrenting, right? And it was all music sharing. It was peer-to-peer. It was the first of its kind. There were other softwares like SoulSeek and stuff, which aped it. And then when torrenting came out, it pretty much killed that kind of software. But Napster eventually became a legit place to sell music. But Metallica came out against them because they were like, why the fuck? Like, you're really stealing from us. And although they weren't wrong, the way they went about it was completely against it. But ultimately, like, they just didn't understand what the fans wanted, and they didn't embrace the technology, which is why the pirating became so popular, and still is, but to a lesser degree, I feel. There was no revenue to be taken from them other than you just get the music for free. They weren't, like, reappropriate. They weren't charging for the albums or anything. But, you know, that's why that, for me, was the big paradigm shift in the industry, was because of the fact that the industry became, we have to play catch up now. How do we get our music in the hands of people? How do we get them away from Napster, basically? And that's where the MP3s going on the websites came from. That's where MySpace came from. That's where, you know, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, all these things. But what happened was, in the industry's attempt to take the power out of people's hands, you know, to keep a stranglehold on the industry, they actually gave people more power to create and distribute on their own without the need of a label. So now the label has to compete with the independent musician, and the only thing they have that's different is the marketing power and the marketing money. And, you know, whether that's radio play or sponsored YouTube videos or whatever, some people that's going to appeal to and some people it isn't. I would argue that if you're making pop music to begin with, it's unlikely that you're going to be too worried about your integrity as an independent artist. It's just not the way it goes. But if you're making, you know, hip hop or hardcore punk or metal or dubstep or, you know, anything outside of that, you know, bum-be-dim-be-dim-be-dim stuff, you're going to want to use that technology and push your own agenda and do things on your terms because you can. Especially if people start to like what you do. And if they like what you do, you can then prove to somebody else that wants to make money off of you, I don't need you, you know, lower your number. You know, because maybe someone wants to market you, but it's like, well, I don't need you right now, kind of thing. And that's where it is now. Even 10 years ago, you would need as much intervention as possible. It's just a matter of just being savvy to the way the industry is going and trying to get yourself in front of people by being savvy of just the art of the internet itself. I would argue now that the only reason that you want to be on a label, and even this is arguable, is tour support, merchandising, and as a file format, they absolutely were around, MP3s. It wasn't something that people were fully aware of, like on a large scale. Like Napster's what busted the doors wide open as far as recognition of the technology and the ability to use it. But I would say, but again, we're talking mainstream, mind you. File compression in general was something that the average person just didn't understand. And also, let's not forget that a lot of people didn't want to sit in front of their computer to listen to music. In the MP3 player, the ability to rip to CD, not everyone had that. Like, shit, I didn't even have my first CD burner until 2001. And I'm an avid music dude. So from my perspective, and from many people's perspective, like that was when it became evident, okay, we have to start changing things. But I would, again, argue that now we're talking about just a lot more avenues. Instead of like having to go with one lane of traffic to get to people, you can pick your battles. You can decide, I want to go on one thing, I can go on a bunch of things. Podcasting is the same way, where you have a choice and you have control of how your music is going to get out there. Or even if you're just a fan and you listen to music and you want to make sure other people will hear it, I can click on Twitter and get it out there. I could click on Facebook or Reddit or LinkedIn or whatever. Be like, yo! Granted, I don't see a lot of, yo, check out this fucking dank-ass shit on LinkedIn. I really don't. You just don't see it. But the opportunity is there, right? So this idea that the ability to create and share is there now without having to involve a third party in the way that I had to and many other musicians had to do back in the proverbial day. So, but one of the things I think is the most pertinent is the ability to create like at a computer with minimal cost, because back, 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you had to have like a MIDI keyboard and all this other stuff, and you had to know a lot more. You had more hardware you needed to. Like right now, you could easily use a regular keyboard as a MIDI controller and write music. It's not optimal, but it can be done. So from chat, we see Blight Me. Napster and other places to me were more due to Apple's draconic EULA and the want to have it our way. Yeah, but the thing is, you have to understand that a lot of that stuff, at least, again, mainstream culture, like, people weren't aware of a lot of that stuff. Like, for example, like, if you wanted to use, back in the day, if you wanted to use an iPod for music, it had to be in their format. You had to buy from their store. That was it. That was the deal. So a lot of people would buy a third-party generic MP3 player. That's why they were so popular, in my opinion. I agree with you. I think that proprietary file formats attempted to kill the open free market. I'm grateful that they did not. And as long as people continue to just keep putting stuff out there, I think we're going to be fine. And now it becomes kind of it's no longer how do you get your music in front of people. It's how do you protect your investment, which is, good and bad. It's a good and bad problem to have, right? So if I put my music on SoundCloud, there is software out there that people can just rip it right off. I mean, if you're patient enough, you could just open up SoundCloud, open up OBS, hit record, or, Audacity, hit record your desktop music, and then you got MP3 of it. If you really want to. I don't recommend it. I don't condone that because that's fucking illegal. but it can be done. So it's something that you, as an artist, you have to decide, okay, I want to have my music be for free, or I want to charge for it, or I'll take some of it. It's all a matter of knowing that those challenges are coming and being able to say, here's how I want to deal with it, right? So, you know, but to me, that also creates a dilemma. You almost have too many solutions to the problem, if that makes sense. Where someone just coming in out of nowhere that wants to play music, they may not know about a lot of the avenues that are out there. But again, still a good problem to have. But I do believe that the heart of the music industry is always going to be that guy who is, or gal, who is in their garage or in their room or at school strumming a guitar for the first time, hitting a drum, whatever, or someone experimenting with, you know, electronic music at home, just kind of finding their way. Like, that's where it's at, as far as I'm concerned. That's the big thing. But people also tend to have like these rose colors glasses for bands like the Beatles, Black Sabbath, even later bands like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, stuff like that, and having this idea that that's still the aspiration. I will tell you that playing live music in front of large amounts of people is a thrill, but it's a fucking slog. It's a fucking pain in the ass. And you can get just as much, you know, ethereal adulation from people just listening to it online and stuff like that. Because ultimately the problem that I have is that people don't understand how much of an expense playing live music can be. You know, we were making a decent amount of money on the road when we were touring, but we was going right back into the tour. Like, I'd come home owing money because I wasn't able to pay my rent while I was gone. In fact, the biggest tour I ever went on, I had to go to friends to borrow money to pay the rent while I was gone because I knew I wouldn't have any money coming back. And that's like, as the problem became that the further along you go, the bigger venues you play, the more it costs to play there, the more it costs to get to like wider places and stuff. You know, we went from Oregon to Texas to New York and back around the whole time, hoping we'd make enough money to get to the next place. Legitimately. We had a British Petroleum, a BP credit card for gas for emergencies. We maxed that fucking thing on tour. We didn't make enough money, even with pre-sales and everything else. It was brutal. So, you know, you look at like larger productions and they're like, oh, they must be making a lot of money. Look at this show. Well, you know how much it costs to put on a show like that? Like, you know, Madonna or Iron Maiden or whatever. They've got like scores of people making those shows happen. And it's, the bigger you get, the more it costs to do what you do and to get the effect in the show that people are expecting from you. And people, when they start making music, don't understand that. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about the kind of underground nature of, you know, free music. Not necessarily free music, but like you can put your music anywhere you want. And one of the things I think electronic music gets right, you know, people talk about going to like a fucking dubstep show, and I'm like, what, you mean a rave light? It's a rave with less drugs? And really it is, because, you know, someone shows up, they hit play, and, you know, you're DJing an album for your fans. But what I like about that is it's a real world gathering of people that essentially it's like a party for people that are fans of your act. There's a lot less cost involved with that, ultimately, because you can be one person with equipment that fits inside of a suitcase and do a whole show. And that's awesome, right? I saw a hip-hop tour come through earlier this year, I'm not a huge modern hip hop guy anyway. It was B. Dolan and a bunch of people that came with him. And that was great. It's basically, they had a turntable and a mixer and a couple mics. That's it. And everyone, and I do mean everyone on that tour, was in their own little vehicle, like a little car or something. It's beautiful. You didn't have to worry about towing vehicles. You didn't have to worry about like rent and stuff. Gas wasn't a huge cost because, again, you weren't towing all this crazy amounts of stuff. And people needed to play on certain shows they could versus not. It was all, flexible and organic, and I loved that. And I thought, okay, so this is kind of like the hybrid, versus, these live bands that have big drum sets and guitars and amps and basses and egos the size of a house. And I like the idea, again, that because technology has evolved to where you can make things more compact, it makes more sense in the long run. Does that mean that if I were 20 years younger, that I have an easier time of it now? I don't think so. Can you make more of a name for yourself and potentially make a living off of your music easier in today's day and age? Yes. Depending upon your genre, though, you may be forced to be on the road to do that because album sales aren't as high as they used to be. Your streaming services like Google and iTunes and so forth take a large cut of those sales. Marketing is still a huge cost. So the only way that you can really make money, again, depending upon the genre of music that you play, in the traditional sense, is to tour. And you sell merch. You make money on the road. But you got to have like big shows. And again, it's that big cycle, like as you get bigger, this stuff like that. Still better than it used to be, because at least there's more opportunity for more bands to do that. But lightning still has to strike. Because while anyone can make music, that creates a saturated market, right? So now there's a saturation factor that wasn't there 10, 20 years ago. At least not as much saturation as there is now. I mean, there's hundreds of metal bands that I'll never hear that are probably really good. But I do have a strong sense that the majority of the bands that I should be hearing that I would appeal to me is getting in front of me for the most part. But there's always going to be somebody that I miss. And that's kind of depressing. So like fans almost have to make finding new music their full-time job, or a part-time job at least. On Thursday at 1 p.m. I'm gonna go looking for new shit, right? And there's avenues to do that. And yeah, Silver, like you have to protect your IP. Like this is your intellectual property. But granted, there's more information about how to do that. The cost behind doing that is lower than it used to be. It used to be back in the day you had to have a lawyer. You had to pay that lawyer. Versus if you do a little bit of research on copyright law and trademarking and just get that shit done, you're good. Like, that's pretty much it. So it kind of, there's different ways to approach it for sure. But I got, my old drum set out in the living room, 20 feet away or whatever. I don't even know how far it is. But it's been in bags since would have been March of 2011. I haven't come out except to like clean them once in a while. I'll take them out, get them, dust them off, make sure the bags are okay and stuff. I don't use them. Anything that I do demo or write, I do on the computer. I'm demoing stuff when I have time, which is never. I will eventually, when I really sit down and really get like the sounds out that I want to use, I am going to write the next record on stream, on a creative stream and stuff. Right, but and I remember that whole thing, like you're like intellectual property is a joke, ask Vanilla Ice, whoever owns rights to Queen. Queen does now. That they eventually got those rights back. But you have to understand that part of the reason behind that controversy is that those were questions that had never been raised before. sampling was brand fucking new at the time. And no one knew how to deal with it from a fair use point of view. No one knew how to deal with it from a plagiaristic or copyright. Like, it didn't seem like, where is the artistic line drawn, right? Because, you know, I'll give you a great example. In my opinion, this is a good example. You know, a few years after that, the band that I was in, the one that had the demo that that we had to borrow the money to get that done. When we first started writing music for that project, we wrote a riff that was great. It was awesome. And we made this whole song around it. It was perfect. Like, it was like, this is exactly what we want to sound like. This is awesome. 2 days later, Fear Factory comes out with their second album called Demanufacture. I fucking swear. The first song and the ninth song each had riffs from the song that we had written. It was simple, and it was just a matter of time before someone wrote those riffs, but we didn't know, because by then they had already written that song. Because the album was being released, they already had ASCAP filings and all that stuff. So had we come out and recorded and released the song even a couple days later, the assumption would be that we stole it from them. But it was really weird, because, like, not even 2 months after that, Suffocation released an album that had an extremely similar riff. It was slightly different, and it was clear that they were in production at the same time that Fear Factory was, right? And they were even on the same label, but they were on two different parts of the country. Fear Factory's on the West Coast, and Suffo was on the East Coast. And again, it just goes to show you that three separate entities came up with very similar stuff within a few months of each other. You know, so, and then you take, and that's just people coming up with shit in their head. When you add the problems and the complications of sampling into it, that's when it becomes something that it's a gray area, and it still is, in my opinion. So what are you going to do? Do I think that Vanilla Ice needed to be more straightforward about what he was doing? Yeah, I do. But I think that he was towing a company line, because lawyers are like, fuck them. There's no law in place right now that says you can't do that. There is now, but there wasn't then, not really. There wasn't stealing a whole song. And so now if you just say, I sampled this, and you give them, you know, credit or whatever, it's okay. But I don't think you have that anywhere near as much as you used to. Because now there's a whole industry of people that just create beats, grooves, loops for people. And that's a lucrative market in and of itself. Someone who will never get credit for their work in a real publishing sense. You pay them, you know, $5, $10, $50, $500 for their loop or whatever, and you put that on your record, they never have to pay you another dime again. But that's, if you make enough of them, you know, you'll make ends meet eventually. And you can't really do that in the more organic stuff like rock or metal or blues. You can't. There's not really a way to do that. I think the version of that is like a session musician who comes in and plays stuff for you. But again, you have that opportunity now where there was no way that was going to happen back then. So, but I feel like it is that, like, so now the argument is, when is too much? When is opportunity too much? When is there too many places you could point yourself? And I don't know that we're to that point, and I feel like there's just less of a chance of someone taking advantage of you if you can maintain control of your product in a much larger way. Yes, the risk still exists for people to steal and stuff like that. That's always going to be there, because if a motherfucker wants to be a criminal, they're always going to have that opportunity, right? And that's not avoidable. People are it's just kind of, you know, the nature of the beast, as it were. So to me, we're just at a place where you have the opportunity to do. She should go out there and just be a musician, and work hard at it. So that's pretty much all that I have to say on the subject right now. I wanted to just word vomit at you guys about music, where it's been, where it's going. We can always go more in depth on any of these subjects later, and we absolutely can. But for now, that's all I had. So that's all that's in Grind's head for today. So I thank you for joining the podcast. We'll see you next time. Cheers.